Hi, I'm Matt Eland with Tech Elevator. I'm going to talk to you today about a feature of the C# programming language called enums, or enumerated types, is the longer form of that. Enums they exist to solve a very specific problem. I'm going to show you a program here, and that program has this particular problem. Because go figure, it's a video on enums, so let's show where it's useful. So I have here a C# console application that has a collection of game enemies: a goblin, a troll, and a rock monster. It's a rock monster, not a rock lobster. And what we're going to do is we're going to loop over each enemy that we have, and then we're going to do some form of damage to them. Uh, so for each enemy, we're going to attack the enemy, and then we're going to write, the enemy that we attacked, and then how much hit points it has remaining, or health. Um, Side note, just a fun little example, little exercise here. Tech Elevator does not condone stabbing, smashing, burning, or otherwise, damaging um, any form of life, including goblins, trolls, rock monsters, rock lobsters, or people. Um, but now that we have that out of the way, let's just take a look at how this is working when we run it. So if I run my application, we see you stab the goblin, it now has 0 hit points left. You stab the troll, it now has 10. You stab the rock monster, it now has 5. So we see some sort of different behavior from the 3 of these. And so we can kind of figure out, like, hey, something's going different with all these. Well, all 3 of these start with 10 hit points. So what's going on here is that we're saying we're going to deal 5 base damage to each enemy, and it's of damage type 1. Well, whatever damage type 1 is. Spoilers, I happen to know that it's stabbing, but looking at this code, you couldn't tell that, and that's part of this problem that we're going to be solving today. So I'm just going to write 1 equals stab in here, just so we have it for reference. Okay, so before we go on, let's take a look at the game enemy class, just so we can understand our code a little bit better. So this is an abstract class, meaning that we cannot create a new game enemy on its own. It has to actually inherit from game enemy for us to be able to call its constructor. Um, it also means that we can have abstract members, which we have a couple of here. So first we have a hit points property, and that defaults to 10. The only thing that can actually set the hit points is an individual inheriting class. So a goblin would be able to set its own hit points. A troll, similarly, a rock monster. Program.cs can't set hit points on an enemy, which is pretty cool. Next, we say that anything that inherits from a game enemy must give us a getter for a name. And finally, we have we say that anything inherits from game enemy must also give us a method called attack that deals a base damage and it gives us a damage type, and it doesn't return anything. And if we look back at program, we see this is exactly what we need. We have a game enemy, and we're relying on its attack method, the getter on the name, and the getter on the hit points. This is polymorphism right here. So we have a collection of 3 different enemies. These are all inheriting from game enemy, and we're handling them. We're treating them differently, but based on their similarities. So anything that's a game enemy is going to have attack, name, and hit points. But how it behaves in its attack method might be a little bit different. So that's sort of what's going on here with that. So let's dive into the code a little bit deeper. So let's take a look at our goblin class first. So our goblin, it inherits from game enemy. It gives us a name that's a goblin, and then we have its attack method. We say if damage type is 1, well, then we're going to do double damage right here. So the base damage times 2. Otherwise, we're just going to do normal damage. But already we're starting to see a problem. I can't remember what 1 is. And I'm thankful I have a little comment right here that says they're more susceptible to stabbing, but I might not have had that comment, or might not have made that association or remembered it. So here I'm just going to write myself a helpful reminder that 1 equals stab. That's what that damage type is. But if you're joining my project, you might not know that. Like, you'll see a whole bunch of these magic numbers, as we call them, and you won't know that a 1 here it means a stab. So you can start to see the little bits of this problem here. Let's look at our troll. Troll is very similar, inherits from game enemy, has a name of troll. But when you attack it, the only thing that actually does damage is fire. So we say if the damage type is fire, then we'll subtract the damage. Otherwise, nothing happens. This is why when we stab the troll, it still remains at its full health. And again, we have that same sort of a problem. We say, hey, the damage type has to equal 3. Well, what's 3? Well, thankfully, past Matt has put a helpful comment in here telling me that 3 is fire, and I probably could have figured it out by reading this comment up here. But you might not have this in the real world. And so you can start to see the sensitivity of using these numbers. And finally, we'll look at Rock Monster. Same thing, inherits from game enemy, has a name of game monster or of rock monster. And now down here on line 15, we're switching on the type of damage that we're doing. So it's going to be either, here, crushing. So if it's crushing damage, we're going to do double damage to the rock monster. It's very susceptible to being hit with a hammer, apparently. Fire damage, rock monster doesn't care about fire. It's just going to singe the rock a little bit. No worries. But if it's not crushing or fire, then we'll just do normal damage. That's fine. So you can see it's working, but we have to remember what these magic numbers are. We're reliant on these comments. And that's not a great place to be in for maintainability. So just running again, just to make sure that everything still works. And we can see we stab the goblin and it now has 0 hit points. That's because it's more susceptible to stabs. We stab the troll and it's still at 10 hit points. It's because the stab isn't fire. We stab the rock monster and it does normal damage. It's about what we'd expect. But this code is hard to read, particularly in this file, especially if we didn't have these right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into program and I'm going to add in down here at the bottom of this file. Normally I wouldn't put it here, but just for illustration purposes while teaching, I'm going to put it right here. Public class damage type is how I might want to start declaring this. But except it's not a class. It's something special. This is something called an enum. So I'll say public enum damage type. And now I'm going to declare what types of damage I want. Well, I see here I have a stab, so I'm going to want a stab damage type. Now I'm going to put a comma and say, well, what other types of damage do I have? Well, I remember I had crushing damage. And I remember I also had fire damage. Okay, so these are my 3 supported damage types. So now I'm going to go into game enemy, and I'm going to say, hey, instead of giving me an integer for damage type, I want you to give me a damage type. And my code completion even tells me I have damage type. And if we go back to program, we see we get a compiler error already. So it says like, hey, I can't convert from an integer to a damage type. Are you sure you really want to do this? And in fact, I do. And I'm very thankful for that compiler error right there, because it's protecting me from making mistakes. And so in this case, I say, okay, well, this shouldn't be an integer anymore. This should be a damage type. So instead of an int, I'll just say it's a damage type, and that's my enum name. And so now I can't say 1. Instead, I say damage type dot, and now I select which type of damage type I'd like to do. In this case, I'm doing stab damage. And look at this. I don't need this comment anymore. My code's now readable without it. Well, I still have some issues with my code if I tried to build. So I go over here to Goblin. We'll take a look at that. And we say, oh, Goblin's not compiling. It says like, hey, I don't have something that's a method named attack that has an integer and a damage type parameter. I have this guy. It's not quite exactly the same thing. And this is saying like I can't override an int and an int. I have an int and a damage type. Did you mean to override that? And in fact, I did. So I'll change this to damage type. And so now those errors have gone away, and I now have a new one. Yay! It's differently broken. Yay! And here's telling me the same thing. I can't compare a damage type to an integer. Well, that's great. I don't want to have this number anyway. That's what I'm trying to get rid of. So I'm just going to say damage type dot stab. And now I don't need that comment at all. So now, if the damage type is stabbing, do double damage. Otherwise, do normal damage. Same thing with the troll. Change this int to a damage type. Change this to damage type dot fire. We'll get rid of this comment. And in fact, we could almost get rid of this comment here because this code tells us about the same thing. I kind of like this one, though. It lets me know that this is really intentional, that it shouldn't be damaged by anything else. But you can see how using enums is starting to get rid of the need to document the weirder things in your code, because your code's now more readable on its own, which is the end goal we should all be striving for. So finally, let's take a look at our rock monster. It has the same issue here. Change that from an int to a damage type. And now we get a couple of errors. We say, hey, I can't convert type int to damage type. Are you missing an explicit cast? Well, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do damage type dot crush. I'll get rid of this comment. And here, damage type dot fire. And now my code is actually pretty readable. And if I run it, it should compile, and we should be able to run, and we'll get the exact same result. So that's pretty cool. On top of this, if I ever wanted to add in a new type of damage, all I have to do is go down to here, and I can say, boom, we now have a new type of damage in our system. We can say that when goblins get hit by existential dread, they immediately die. Else, if damage type, and I didn't have to remember any number there, I could just do it. So obviously I'm having a little bit of fun there with that. You're likely not going to get paid to write games, but there are other types of scenarios where you might want to represent things with an enum. So let's talk about what those are. So enums are good for when you have a discrete set of possible options. So think about a card game. A card is either going to be a spade, a club, a diamond, or a heart, or potentially a joker, I suppose. So these are the types of cards you might have in a playing card deck, right? So this is kind of an exhaustive list of the suits that a card might be. So maybe a card suit might be a better name for that enum. Think about a bank account. What kind of things do you have going on in there? Well, we're going to have withdrawals, and we'll have deposits. You may also choose to represent different things with special types. So we might say you have fines and interest, and those are different from withdrawals and deposits. Your system might be one like that. You might say you have a transfer. But you can use enums to represent like kind of discrete cases of logic inside of your applications. And they're there to get rid of magic numbers or magic strings or things like that. So you can use these things and just have very good, high quality, maintainable applications. So give them a try. There's a little bit more to them than this, where you can kind of explicitly set the number values, and how they get compiled is a little bit different. But on the surface, very simple to work with, and the compiler can start helping you when you make mistakes, which is great. Helps you build larger applications, helps you build more readable code, and that's always a good thing. So if you had any questions, please reach out. I'm matt.eland@techelevator.com or at integerman on Twitter. You also can leave a comment on this video as well. But have fun, happy coding, and I hope you enjoy enums.